Well, Andy's going to be at the panel the whole time after the initial presentation. You're welcome to join Amanda.
I need a refreshment.
And then just done.
Santa impersonates for adults.
Yeah, I had. So I had. Well, I had. Then he stopped at 6. And yeah, if I give them a remote cooker, they don't have a lot there. They're gonna walk this way. So if they're all on top of yours, it'd be fine. By the way, space for you. So I fired him and I got no one's bossing me around.
I like how you just like
Question my authority. Getting cold. Don't you dare. But yeah, this because when we do the visits, then in between we all hit the events. Yeah, it's a great neighborhood. Rare views. Up the hills, Gammon, Woodstock. Yeah. You did? Really? You predate me.
Oh yeah, last night.
Yeah.
And then it was on 30 buckets.
Yes. Yes. Your kids, they must have, I didn't. Because you have the stage and they don't want to tell stories. That made me think of it. It made me think of it.
they're at the sustainability.
Gets up and he goes, have one of those twins in his leg. I didn't think he would do his hand in the drawer.
Good afternoon. So I had to get you all here so I could tell my joke, so I'm going to take off my mask now and just remind you that I did remember to shave this morning. So the advantage of having masks in my class is I can sometimes not bother to shave on a morning. So good afternoon and welcome to the Discovery Building here. I'm Michael Ferris. I'm a professor of computer sciences and the director of the Data Sciences Hub. That is located just over here if you're interested in that. It's appropriate that a meeting describing new projects associated with solar and agricultural systems is being hosted by the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, as we at WID are about to embark on a new program dedicated to resilience, robustness, and adaptability in complex systems. And these are issues that are at the heart, I believe, of our discussion today. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejo since time immemorial. The history of colonization outlined on this slide informs our work at the University of Wisconsin and leads us to a vision for a shared future of collaboration and innovation. Collaboration and innovation are key facets of the project at hand today. There's a collaboration between the UW and Iant Energy. There's innovation driven by sharing land use with integrated energy and agricultural systems, with a promise maybe of more broad ecosystem benefits. Today's agenda is a quick primer to some extent to get everybody on board with the vocabulary and the promise, the opportunity, and the challenges of agrivoltaics. Secondly, how that fits maybe into a broader discussion or research opportunities for ecosystems more broadly thought about. Third, there's going to be a lot more details on the particular proposed Kagonza Research Campus Solar and Agricultural Project. And that will then be followed by opportunities for discussion, for clarification, and networking. Photovoltaics, or solar panels, can be installed on land that is unsuitable for agriculture, improving energy profile. But as the demand for renewables, in particular for solar, increases, new energy installations may take land out of agricultural production, leading to conflicts in land use, policies, and discussions. Instead, agrivoltaics proposes co-location of an agricultural and a photovoltaic system, a win-win situation. However, this comes for great opportunities for people like me. It comes with a bunch of different trade-offs. So trade-offs, that there might be a trade-off in the types of crop that you can grow in this photovoltaic agricultural system. So the portfolio of crops that you can grow, the modified design that might be necessary for the photovoltaic system, which might be more costly. There might be trade-offs in terms of access patterns. Do I make bigger gaps so that I can get bigger machinery in? There could be security issues. There could be issues associated with safety concerns. The list potentially goes on. Steve Ackerman and I worked on a project some years ago that considered trade-offs between weather data predictions and design of robust operation of solar systems. We thought about how better predictions of snow in April, how better predictions of phenomena like this could affect solar or operations, albeit and installations of solar systems. I'm personally excited about the opportunity to apply similar optimization techniques and tools to understand and improve the trade-off in this system between the aforementioned agricultural usages and the photovoltaic system that is part of this. And to operate this overall system in a way that is done much more efficiently. Furthermore, we at Wisconsin see the potential for integration of ecosystems beyond what Illinois are thinking about here in this graphic, which we stole from Illinois, which was concentrating on water conservation. I think there's a broader portfolio of economic or ecosystem benefits that could actually be realized. And I'm delighted to introduce my colleague and the Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education, Steve Ackerman, to talk about some of those potential ecosystem services. Steve.
Thank you, Michael. I got to hit the slide. Okay, I'm going to hit the slide so you can look at some of the potential research areas while I say thanks to Michael for that nice introduction. I also want to thank the Madison Office of Sustainability for organizing this information session and for all the work they're doing to get us that status of actually being an institute that can be defined as being sustainable in terms of how we do our operations. And of course, I also want to welcome our guests from Iant and Sunvest. So as Michael indicated, I'm a weather guy. Most of my research is actually looking at energy in the atmosphere and at the surface. And a lot of that is associated with using satellites, because Wisconsin is the birthplace of weather satellites, as I like to point out, to look at clouds, because they have an important part, an important role in the energy distributions across the planet and across the region. So walking over here, it seemed to me like it was a lot more appropriate to be talking about my research than about solar energy. But nonetheless, I am sure there are sunnier days ahead for this proposed Conganza Research Campus solar and agrivoltaic project. We know that we're going to need solar energy as a renewable energy source to power our environmental systems. It has an important role, along with wind energy and other sustainable energies, in reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are leading to our global warming and regional warming and changes not only in the weather of the regions, but also in terms of the ecosystem. So it's an important part of mitigating climate change. Efficient and effective methods of producing energy from the sun have been going on for decades, and there are a lot of researchers on our campus that look into that voltaic aspect of generating energy from the sun. What I find really exciting personally is we're now looking at an opportunity to look at the impact on the ecosystem. So looking at ecosystem research opportunities as part of this important project. As Michael was inferring, in terms of solar energy, if that's going to become a major contributor to the energy of not only of Wisconsin, of the nation, that's going to require a new kind of built environment. And that can alter everything when we look at the solar exposure, but also the moisture and surface temperatures below and around those sites. So it's important as we look at experiments of developing solar energy to also understand and explore and research ways in which solar installations can better protect and potentially even improve the local ecosystems. And there are a number of research studies that can look at that, and the slides up here provide some of those examples of things that we'll be studying with this limited size solar energy field. I look forward to seeing what our researchers are going to find out. I'm excited about these opportunities, these research opportunities that are going to be enabled by this proposed Conganza Research Campus Solar and Agricultural Research Project, and how that can contribute not only to the energy needs of the state, but of the nation as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh to talk a little bit more about the organization of this. So thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's truly a pleasure to see everyone here and to share some information about our proposed project. My name is Josh Arnold. I'm with the UW-Madison Office of Sustainability, and I'm part of the team that is working together to implement this project, but then also other projects towards our clean energy and sustainability goals. So I'd just like to recognize several folks from my office there in the back seat. If you guys could raise your hands and wave. Thank you all so much for all of your work, not only with this project and putting together this presentation today, but for everything that you do. Our institutional mission challenges us to think about planning a clean energy portfolio with the Wisconsin idea top of mind. And that means centering people-based resilience and equity, being kind and considerate to our neighbors and local communities, and viewing our campus and the lands that we manage on behalf of the Board of Regents as a living, learning lab opportunity. And all the while reducing our campus emissions and increasing the positive attributes of our work. And with all of that in mind, that's really what led to the development of this proposed project. The proposed Kegonsa Research Campus Solar and Agricultural Research Project that you see here would be located on about 15 acres within UW-Madison's Kegonsa Research Campus, just outside of Stoughton. The 2.25 megawatt AC solar project would generate about enough electricity to power somewhat more than 450 homes. The description or the image that you see here is really just the base case for this project. It's designed to illustrate the size and scope of the project, but what's missing and what we're hoping to elicit from you all here in person and listening on Zoom is how we might consider opportunities to design this array to facilitate all of the wonderful research that Professor Michael Ferris and Vice Chancellor Steve Ackerman were talking about before. So that's our mission for today. We'll share a little bit about the project and then open it up for your input and for discussion on what might be possible for this project. As I mentioned, this project would be on the UW-Kegonsa Research Campus, and that's part of a campus that includes 280 acres altogether, including the Physical Sciences Lab. I want to send a shout out to all the folks at the Physical Sciences Lab who've been incredibly cooperative partners in conceiving this idea. I mentioned that there would be roughly 15 acres or so that we might have to work with for this project. And the university, under this proposed project, the university would be leasing the land to Iant Energy. And the university would retain the renewable energy credits associated with this project. And some of the outcomes that we're hoping to get out of this project, of course, we want to support our institutional mission, creating research, education, and learning opportunities. We want to make progress towards our clean energy and sustainability goals. We track those goals through STARS, the Sustainability Tracking Assessment and Rating System. And campus currently has a STARS Silver rating, and over time we aspire to continue to evolve that rating, eventually get to gold and even platinum. And solar and renewable energy projects are one way that we can help do that. Of course, for some of our collaborators, Iant Energy, this contributes towards their clean energy blueprint goals. And we have a representative from Iant Energy to speak about that later on in the presentation. It was also critical for us to make sure that we were being a good neighbor and a good partner with our local community. And that meant being in close communication with the town of Dunn and with Dane County to share information about the proposed project and to get feedback from them and learn about any of their concerns. And Gary Brown will talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. And I think as a last point to this, there's a lot of solar that's being proposed in Wisconsin. We know that solar is one path towards the clean energy future of the state, and it can be quite contentious, and we've seen that through recent projects. There's a lot of either ag or solar. And what we're hoping to do with this project is maybe change the conversation a little bit and think about, instead of an either or, maybe think a little bit more about a both and. Maybe there is a way where we can do a solar project and agricultural activities at the same location and create more benefits for everyone involved. The expected project timeline is behind me here. You can see that we're currently in the community engagement phase, and also towards the end of our process of the Wisconsin Environmental Policy Act. That included an environmental impact assessment. And we expect that later on this spring, we will be able to give our collaborators at Iant Energy and their team the official go-ahead notice to proceed. From there, we will be re-engaging with Dane County to go through their conditional use permitting process. And you can see some of the remaining aspects of this project. So while we have some ideas on what this project might entail at this point, we're still early on, and there's still lots of opportunity to have feedback and to help shape this project to make it as successful as possible. The hope is that around this time next year, we'll be able to start construction if everything goes as well as possible. And then by the end of next year, we could have an array that is generating electricity. We'll see how that goes. There's a lot of disruptions right now in the supply chain and other things out there that could easily throw a wrench in this timeline, but that's what we're aspiring to do right now. I want to just take a moment to recognize and thank all the people that have made a significant contribution to making a project like this happen. The university, we haven't implemented, we haven't developed a solar project like this one before, and so working together has required putting sort of new areas of communication together where they didn't previously exist. And so I would like to thank all the offices on this slide, particularly the Office of Space Management, who've been critical in putting the documents together for preparing the lease. Of course, Iant Energy, you'll be hearing from later on. Sunvest Solar, you'll be hearing from later on in the presentation as well. And the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, thank you, Professor Ferris. And of course, the Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education, thank you, Vice Chancellor Ackerman, and all the folks here from your office. But none of this would be possible without our next speaker. Gary Brown is the Director of Campus Planning and Landscape Architecture, and it was working with Gary and his team, working with Gary's leadership, that really made this project go from an idea to the possibility of being implemented. So let me introduce Gary, and he'll tell us more about the project.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Gary Brown. I'm the Director of Campus Planning and Landscape Architecture and the Campus Landscape Architect. I also direct the UW-Madison Environmental Affairs Office. So I take care of all of what Josh referenced in the WEPA documentation processes or the environmental impact processes for the campus. So whenever we do development on any of the Border Regions properties, we're required actually to review every project based on the Environmental Policy Act and all of the information associated with that. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I think one of the other important things is just to think about where are we locating this? Josh came to me and said, you know, we want to do a solar array. Where can we put this thing? And I started scratching my head and looking around. And I said, well, I know we have land on campus, but it's probably not going to be a big enough area to do a solar array on campus. But what other outlying properties do we have? And we looked at several different locations there, and the Kegonsa site came up as one opportunity for us. I had been working down there in several of the projects, and the ropes course that's down there right now, along with some other projects. It is about a 20 to 30 minute drive, depending on so-called traffic from Madison. So it's not that far away, and it's easily accessible, not only for our faculty and staff, but our students as well. So it's just west of Lake Kegonsa. You see a portion of the site here on the right-hand side of the slide where the solar array is being located. This is the about 15 acres that we're looking at for this. One of the things that I do as a landscape architect to understand where do we put these kinds of things is really look at all the different variables of the existing site. So we look at soils, we look at wetlands, we look at solar aspect, we look at access, but we also think about what are the impacts going to be to the neighbors in this area. One of the reasons we selected this particular site is because it was more central to our overall campus, away from the existing neighbors on both the east and the west sides, but also on a south-facing slope, something that had good solar access, and then also in an area that didn't have a significant amount of prime agricultural lands. There's some prime agricultural lands on the north end, but because of my knowledge and understanding of the geology of this site, just to the east of here is actually a drumlin, left by one of the glaciers that came through here. So it's a little bit more rocky, a little bit more sandy, probably not something you would be using for agricultural lands. And this south-facing slope also has some of those same characteristics. Even though it's already being used for agricultural properties, it's not one of the prime agricultural land sites that we have. It's also outside of wetlands, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. So this environmental impact assessment that we do, we spend time thinking about, well, what could the impacts be? We actually have a scoping meeting. We meet with the public and understand, okay, what concerns do you have about this type of project on this land? We heard some concerns about impacts to prime agricultural lands, but we also heard impacts from a visual standpoint. Was there going to be noise? Were there impacts in adding additional power lines? But mostly about the visual impact, and that's not uncommon. We typically have to deal with that on many of our projects, but we also did some of these renderings that you've seen to help people understand what those view sheds would be like and how things would be changing. On the prime ag side of it, we really are excited about this agrovoltaics process and understanding how can we do research out there. We're not just putting a bunch of solar panels out in a farm field. It really is about integrating the university's mission of research and teaching and outreach into this particular array. And we think this will actually help set a standard for future solar arrays across the state of Wisconsin, as many communities think about how to integrate solar panels into their areas. So we spent time with our environmental impact assessment. We did have a couple public meetings related to that. It was published locally in the papers, so take a look at it. Some of the things that we found is that there actually are not significant impacts in this overall development. Are there impacts? Yes, but they're not really rising to the level of significance where it would be a problem where we would have to rethink the particular site of this project. So here again is the 15-acre site you can see here, but this is overlaid on a wetlands map. One of the concerns that we were hearing from the town of Dunn staff was make sure you're not within a wetland. Well, of course, that was one of the first things that we thought about. And we knew that there was a floodplain down in the lower part of the south end of the site. So we were trying to keep it up out of that actually mapped wetlands. So again, it's just one of the things that we look at in the overall environmental impact assessment process. Again, here's the location. This one talks a little bit about archaeological sites, another thing that we have to look at when we look at project sites like this. There are no known archaeological sites in this area. There are sites to the east along the western shores of Lake Kaganza, where we know that there were Native nations living and had habitation sites. I'm not sure about mounds, but there were definitely habitation sites along that western shore of Lake Kaganza. But in our particular area, because it has been farmed for many, many decades, and we also did some looking at what we had in the research papers and documentation that you see here. To the west and to the south, there are some archaeological sites around. So as we continue to do our development, we'll be watching for that. And as we do some of our construction work, we'll be watching for any potential resources that might show up in the overall process. But for now, we're pretty sure there's no known archaeological resources in this part of the area. We also look at how do we connect this system? You know, you can put a solar array in the middle of a field like this, but you also have to connect it to the grid. So how is Alliant going to do that? What was the route of that? And what we've been talking about is actually connecting to existing power lines and existing poles. So we're not adding a bunch of infrastructure, we're actually just connecting to those. And the connection point from that, coming from the array down Schneider Drive, would actually be underground, so that then we would connect to the above ground poles going north to a substation that's a couple miles to the north of this. So that connects into the overall system and reduces our overall impacts as well. So I think next up, we have folks from Alliant. I'm going to share a little bit more of the details from you. Josh, who's doing that? All right, Andy.
I'm gonna have to turn my mic on. Gary, you're very tall. And this is, as many of you know, not a good day for a solar field trip, that is for sure. So thank you everybody for having us here. My name is Andy Ehlert. I am a resource development project manager with Iant Energy and have been working with Josh Arnold and the team at UW to put this project together. Once again, as many of you know, of course, we're here because UW's got some significant sustainability goals, and so absolutely does Alliant Energy. And one of them, of course, comes from our main reliability goal, stems from our clean energy blueprint. And before I begin with that, I want to thank a couple of people from Alliant Energy that are here today. We could not have done this project and set this project up with the help of Dana Halverson here. She's our environmental coordinator for this project. Amanda Thomas is one of our generation engineers who's going to be our construction project manager for this project. Steve Grananis way back there, he is on display with the solar panel display. He is our lead engineer on that. And somewhere around here in this room or this building is Chase Coleman. He's one of our communications person. Oh, he's right there. There you go. I thought you were going to be gone. And then lastly, Jeff McCarthy, he's our key account manager with UW. So when you look at why Alliant Energy is involved with this, obviously we have some major significant goals in converting our generation fleet from coal-fired, natural gas-fired, fossil fuel-fired over to sustainable renewable energy over the short term and the long term. And when I say long term, we're looking 2040, 2050. So we have a suite right now, and our suite is basically made up of a multitude of different types of generation. We've got hydro, we've got biomass, we've got wind, we've got solar, we've got a small amount of solar, and we are looking to significantly grow the solar. And that's one of the reasons why we put together in about 2019 our clean energy blueprint. Let me see here, how do I advance this? Okay. So our clean energy blueprint, of course, as you see up here on the screen, is in the short term, we are looking to be installing about 1,100 megawatts of solar in and around our footprint in Wisconsin. Right now, what that constitutes, we've got 12 projects. These are what we would call utility scale projects, ranging from 50 megawatts up to 150 megawatts. We have 12 projects throughout 9 different counties within our footprint. Those are all in a various stages of construction and permitting right now. The first 6 are in construction and moving along. The second are awaiting the Public Service Commission's approval. And once those are approved, we will continue with permitting and actually break ground on some of them this coming summer. So the goal for those projects right there for the 1.1 gigawatts of solar is going to be, we will have those operational by the end of 2023. Once again, if the middle portion of the slide right here is to reduce our carbon emissions from the electricity we generate by 50% by 2023. That 50% represents the number that we had going back to about 2005. And then, of course, the far end of the slide there is to eliminate all coal from our generation fleet by 2040. When you look at some of the short-term things that we've done for the roadmap, we have retired or in the process of retiring the Columbia coal-fired power plant. We are also in the process of closing down our Edgewater power plant. So along with those and a couple others that are in process in the Iowa footprint, we're actually in Wisconsin, in terms of us closing down and not using coal anymore, we're pretty much there. So one of the components of all of the roadmap work that we have put together is we have put together a couple of programs that what we would call renewable energy tariff programs. These are tariffs. These are programs that we work with the Public Service Commission. We got approval from the Public Service Commission to roll out what we would call tariff-based programs, one of which is the customer-hosted program. And the customer-hosted program is the program that, from Iant Energy's perspective, is what we're using as our business model, I should say, with UW. And basically what it is in a very simple element, very simple process, it is our way of siting an Alliant owned and operated and constructed solar facility on leased land. Okay, now this is absolutely, to me, this is a beautiful win-win for companies or entities that are looking for a sustainability, to meet a sustainability goal. And UW, when they came to us and talked to us about this, it was a perfect match. So the customer hosted, like I said, in a nutshell, it is a way for us to build, own, and operate our facilities on land that is leased to us. We look to lease these for 20, possibly 30 years. It's when you look at the sizing, you think to yourself, well, if UW had 900 available acres, could we just site a gigantic solar farm? And the answer is no. Customer hosted as part of the tariff-based program is limited to the firm demand that the customer has. So in this case, UW has a firm demand. When they flip open their electric bill and they see the kilowatts that they've used, their firm demand is greater than 2.25 megawatts. We are allowed to build a tariff-based customer-hosted project up to 2.25 megawatts, and that's approximately about 15 acres. So once again, this is an opportunity, of course, to turn some good available land into an opportunity for a good lease payment for a customer. And once again, one of the elements that is part of the customer hosted is the renewable energy credits. Some of our customers take them, some of them don't. As a tariff-based program, we have to offer, when power is generated, there is a renewable energy credit. One renewable energy credit is equal to 1 megawatt hour. And in this particular project for UW, they have elected to take those renewable energy credits, which basically, in a way, lowers their monthly lease payment by a little bit. And I think that is it. The next person up here is our solar development partners. Once again, we couldn't have done this project, and UW would not have been able, the three parties between UW and Alliant and Sunvest was a remarkable team. And so we couldn't have done it without this gentleman here, John Doherty from Sunvest. So thank you very much.
Andy, thanks. I had to laugh. I was smiling on the drive-in, thinking back. It doesn't feel long ago that I was looking for a place to park my bicycle, which was a lot easier trying to get to class than looking for a place to plug in my car. But made it, and it's great to be here. And thanks everyone for the attention and interest of the program. My name is John Doherty. As Andy mentioned, I'm part of the development team. I work for Sunvest Solar. We're a development company outside of Pewaukee. We have an office here in Madison as well. My colleague Chris is in the back. So we're happy to chat solar the afternoon away as long as people have time. Our role in the program is to act as a development service. So we'll help with design engineering of the solar portion of the project. And then we'll hopefully be the EPC, the contractor to construct the array once it's designed after this process. A couple slides here, and I'll try to move quite quickly. We'll certainly have time for questions later, but a typical array for us when we think of a ground-mounted array, these are just some very common questions we wanted to rattle through and address right up front. So what we propose here, and of course this is all subject to design, what we want to think through, but is a ground-based solar array with driven piles. So essentially no concrete, but steel beams are driven into the earth to hold the array in place for the length of the project. There's one small hiccup on this slide. I apologize for my typing. The racking, as you saw in the rendering photos, are running east and west. So the array is running east and west, and that puts the modules facing south, not east and west. But so south, no moving parts, but directly facing south to generate the maximum amount of energy. Spacing as proposed in the renderings you saw was 16 feet between module rows. So that is one of the kind of topics of conversation. That gap could be used for agriculture in some fashion, whether or not that needed to be larger or have more room underneath the array. Those will be the design considerations we'd work through. Again, just some kind of common questions that we wanted to address. Visual impact, as Gary mentioned, is a particular concern of nearby folks and people who are going to be near the array. I think the project site really lends itself nicely to minimize impact to people just because it's surrounded by additional ag fields. But the modules themselves are minimizing glare. They're supposed to absorb sunlight, and they're also coated with an anti-reflective coating. So hopefully minimizing any glare to passersby. Fixed array, so there's no moving parts, there's no noise from the modules themselves. The inverters and transformer on site will have a hum when the array is operating, but no noise at night. The beautiful thing about a solar array is the minimal amount of work that needs to be done after construction. So the array should have really minimal traffic for operation for its long term. And a couple other notes there at the bottom. No additional buildings would be needed for the project itself, and lighting is not a concern as well. So there would be no site lighting proposed. So at nighttime, it's dark and would blend into the landscape. Oh, well, I guess I covered these things quickly. I'm just going to make sure I can move us along here. I think that's my portion of the slide, so I'll turn it back over to Josh. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, John. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our speakers. Now is the interactive portion of the discussion. So I'm going to invite our panelists up here to the stage. Steve, Gary, Andy, and John. And Now is the time that we would really like to hear from you, from the audience, whether you're here in person or if you are if you're dialing in and attending our Zoom. Please put a question into the chat function, and we have some of our staff who are monitoring the chat function, and we will do our best to make sure that your question is asked here in person. But I know we have a lot of very interested parties and some experts in the room, and I'd like to take this time to acknowledge some of those folks who are here. First, I'd like to acknowledge the senior design team at the Mechanical Engineering School. If you guys can raise your hands. So this team of students at our College of Engineering have a poster in the back. They've been doing a senior design project about this very topic, about agrivoltaics. And so if you haven't already had a chance to look at the poster and engage with the senior design team, I would certainly encourage you to do that after the discussion. And again, thank you so much to the team for being here. Really appreciate it. Second, we have a student group on campus called Helios. Helios, if you don't mind raising your hands, thank you so much for being here. Helios is one of our student organizations that is dedicated to advancing clean energy and renewable energy in particular. And they've been doing tremendous work working with our office and with different groups on campus to implement their vision, including solar bus stops on campus. So look for those coming soon. And thank you to the Helios team for being here. Last, I would like to recognize an industry partner that we have that I personally am very grateful for, which is our representatives from Renew, Wisconsin. If you could raise your hand. Thank you so much. Renew Wisconsin is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing clean energy and renewable energy in Wisconsin and beyond. It's a group that I personally have benefited from for many years, and really, really grateful that you're here today. So thank you. And now we have our panelists. We have our panelists here who are open to take discussions, take comments, questions about the proposed array that you see behind us here. And again, I'd like to emphasize that the array that you see, while it does represent roughly the size of the array that we're looking to develop, roughly that 2.25 megawatt array, the configuration, the spacing, the height of panels are all the types of things that we would like to get feedback on, whether it's different areas of research that you might be interested in looking at, different types of agricultural, other things like that. So we'd like to open it up for questions. And if you do have a question, if you're here in person, we have a microphone set up in the back of the room. And we would invite anyone with questions to make their way to the back of the room there. And what we'll do is we'll invite people to either share anecdotes or stories, examples of agrivoltaic projects in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, anything like that where we as the project team and the panel could sort of take that under advisement. And as we are putting together what we like to call on the project team kind of our wish list, so to speak. We have this amount of land, this roughly 15 acres. We have the project goals. We do have constraints on budget and size, and so we have to be mindful of that. But aside from that, it's really a blank slate. So we'd like to hear from you about your comments. Great, yeah, and folks, if you don't mind, maybe just gathering behind the microphone there. That way, we will be able to get to the questions. And yeah, please take it away.
This is on. Yep. Hi, I'm Joe. I'm actually a mechanical engineering grad from the UW, and I also actually interviewed with Sunvest this morning. Just a quickie 15-minute. So, I know it's just the artist's rendering, but have you guys given any consideration to vertically mounted bifacial panels? The German companies have already probably done some research. There's one called Next to Sun, and I think they just initiated a research project in Japan. And there's a company in Florida called ET-Sun that's also beginning to market. They call it solar fence, but it's a vertically mounted bifacial panel. Big advantage, you don't have to worry about the height of your tractor or anything like that. You just space the rows. And the bifacial, they do best in the morning and at night with the sun angles and all that. So just wondering if that's in consideration, you know, maybe not the whole thing, but part of it, and compare and contrast what your typically, whatever latitude mounted angle monofacial panels are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate the question. I'm looking at Steve, perhaps, as maybe a person who could get us started with that.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much for the suggestion. These are exactly the types of ideas we're hoping to hear from the group today. As we mentioned, you know, we pretty much have a blank slate in terms of what the technical details are going to look like for this facility. Bifacial definitely is an emerging technology. We're using it on many of our larger sites. No guarantees exactly what we're putting in here, but bifacial is definitely an aspect of technology that we're looking at, even in potentially a fixed tilt system, because there are still gains to be had, even in a fixed tilt, not only via trackers or a solar fence or a vertical mount. I will say I think that's a new idea to the project team of the potential for solar fence or vertical mount for ideas in the design. So I think that would be something good for us to add to the list for consideration. Absolutely.
Thank you, Steve. And Gary, not sure if you have any perspective in terms of a vertical facing solar, and if that might help achieve any of the project needs for the visual impact of the project.
That's a really interesting concept. Thanks, Joe, for bringing that up. I've not heard that before. The bifacial panels are something that we're seeing a lot more of these days, particularly up here in the Wisconsin area, where even in the wintertime, you'll get sunlight reflecting off of the snow. So if we do even have it at an angle, we'll be able to collect energy off of that reflected light coming off of the snowpack that's under, assuming it's going to snow again. So, which it seems to be doing every other day around here. But the idea of vertical panels, I think, might be a little bit more problematic for our neighbors from a visual standpoint. It really depends on how high they're going to be mounted and what that visual impact might be. So that's something we could look into. Maybe there would be a section of the array that we could try it on for a period of time to just see what that visual impact might be, but then also understand how does that impact the amount of energy being produced if they are in particular mounted vertically, and then what angle do you provide that on the post? So, knowing we have a solar aspect of south-facing panels here, do we run them, perpendicular to that, a parallel, or at a 45, 30, whatever degree angle, or maybe even try a bunch of different ones to see what that research might produce. But that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, you touched on another thing. It was Next to Sun, or one of them. There's some research they did up in Scandinavia, and they said the farther north, the better they do, just because of the sun angles and whatnot.
Yep. Good. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Gary, and thank you for the question, Joe.
Hi, I'm Bartlett Duran, Sand County Foundation. We work about the land ethic coming out of Aldo Leopold's work, very tied into the farm and keeping working lands working. I want to point out with the solar fence, there's a really clever group of engineers who've done a lot of research on it right there. So have a good conversation. Out of the Northeast, there's a lot of mandate for solar, just like we're seeing here, and they're having extreme conflict between solar siting, including with neighbors and what it looks like, and the energy production that they're being mandated to put in. So we're seeing some pretty nasty fights start. I think this is a critical project to try to get ahead of that. Huge fan, putting that as a caveat, because you're going to think, but, ... My experience with solar going on farmland here in Wisconsin is that it's designed for the profit motive to make it as efficient as possible for the dollars being spent. Part of that is we have several layers of profit coming in before it gets to the actual consumer coming down. We have an opportunity here, I believe, to try several different variations, as you suggested with the solar panel and all, and not have this block drop down right in the middle. There are a lot of different options, including Alliant. You have your sunflower array that you have in your home office here. We have the solar fence over here. That we have 2 or 3 other ideas over here. I think if we focus on that and change this idea of a block in the middle, you'll have a lot more acceptance, because you're trying to see what can actually work with ag. The other thing, now I was glad you had the bigger poster showing the siting of this farm just south of where we're looking, at least on this picture. If this is facing north, you had the wetlands and you had the river, at least drainage districts coming through, or drainage ditches or a creek. And then I believe to our east is Lake Koganza. So you're going to have significant water quality issues going on. And so we have the opportunity again to site the solar where you put in prairie or other permanent cover to really improve the water quality and actually act as a buffer. Now, again, it's not as efficient as your square, but if we're looking at dual use and properly using it, you're going to find a much better overall return when we're looking at resilience, water quality, environmental habitat, and you might even be able to get funded by, we're in the town of Dunn, I think, town of Dunn, to meet some of their nutrient offsets. So it's a way to layer financing coming in to do siting and get out of the maximization of capital, I guess. And I think that's the big change that needs to go on here.
Yeah, if I may say some
Yeah.
comments to that, we are approaching this facility, again, think of this block as if we were doing no agrivoltaic aspects, we would build something like that. We want to look at how can we modify that design to best facilitate, the research or the environmental goals that, we're talking about here today and are important to UW. Now, as I look at that site, the way we have it drawn right now, there is farmland to the south of that I'll call it would be, outside the fence. So I'm not sure how that works into runoff, but I guess my question to you would be, are there specific design criteria or goals? Are you thinking like under the panels or outside the panels would be better for any research on those topics?
On the, with what we're planting underneath the solars?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing you do is it's the siting. So if you follow actually the creek bed or the runoff, so again, you're doing more of a chain. Think of the river, right? The way the creek runs. So it can be serpentine to a certain extent. So if you actually site whatever the equivalent 50 or 100-foot buffer strip there with the pollinator prairie plants, you get the deep rooted. That's going to take care of that buffering action that we look for with water quality. But then you have the solar overlay. And again, it's not as efficient as the square, but it should still be a positive production coming out of it. You just have to think how you're designing a little bit different. And then you can do the same thing wherever, I don't have the soil maps here, but you will find drainage ditches and pathways that are low hanging, that are natural places to put these prairie strips. That's the same thing, you run the solar panels up that. And all of it, I mean, you're within 5 miles of the substation. So it's, the economics shouldn't knock us out on the economics. It's just design wise how you site it. And if we only had a good landscape architect who could help us with it, it would be really useful. I'm assuming you're good. I mean, there's an assumption there.
Well, they tell me.
Okay, that's great. But it's that kind of thing. It's actually starting with the land and what the land is calling for, and then build around it. And then when you get into the productive ag land, which we're always going to run into, that's where things like the solar fence or the sunflowers, or like we have the windmills throughout Iowa, that kind of design where normal production or modified production, whether it's cattle, whether it's soybeans, whether it's haying, can all take place. Corn's probably out. I don't feel bad about that, but in these situations, but it still makes a productive crop. And the last thing I'll add, this is important, I think, especially for the university to be involved in, is to get ahead of the idea of, if I'm a tax person and I'm looking at this field for 20, 30 years, I'm thinking, why is this not an industrial site? Why wouldn't I take this out of the ag tax line, tax level, and put it in an industrial tax level, which now changes the economics dramatically. So I think it's really important we show the ongoing viability of the land when we do these projects. Okay.
So I think I might need to defer to UW on
Yeah,
the
so
citing response.
all of these things are things that we will consider when we get into design. We haven't even gotten to that point yet. And that's why we're having this meeting too, is to get more information about, well, what do you think would be a good design approach as we start looking at this particular site? The image that you see up here was done by our environmental impact assessment consultants to just say, okay, here's 15 acres of solar array. This is sort of what it would look like. But again, we've not gotten into the detailed design. That's what's coming up here this summer as we get into this. I love the idea of contouring it a little bit and putting in those prairie buffers. We know the prairie grasses and the native species that I all learned about in my educational process here at Wisconsin was that it helps replenish the soils. It actually helps with stormwater runoff. Those deep roots actually break up the soil that's there and provide more aeration down into the soil. So there's lots of good reasons to do that. But then also think a little bit more about, well, what other types of agricultural products or research can we do here? Can we do different types of alfalfas? Can we do different types of animal monitoring or animal use of clearing the land? We probably aren't going to be doing prescribed fires in those prairie lands. So what do we need to do? Do we mow it? Do we bring sheep in? I mean, there's all kinds of ways to manage that prairie landscape. That is something that we'll take a look at. But I know there's faculty in landscape architecture and other areas on campus that are very interested in this. And this is just going to be a great project for all of us. And we started this whole process with that in mind, that this was going to be a research facility, not just a way for us to provide sustainable energy to the campus and not just a cost kind of derivative. It was really about the research and mission of the university. So thanks you again. Those are really great comments.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Bartlett. Appreciate your question and your feedback. Next question.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm a student intern at the Office of Sustainability. So from what I understand, this project will be implemented on agricultural research land that's already being used for agricultural research. So my question is, would that kind of agricultural research continue, or are you just changing it completely and starting a new agriculture project as well?
So it's not actually ag research today. We lease the land to a local farmer who uses that for different types of agricultural production. Some years he'll grow corn, some years he'll be growing soybeans or alfalfa, but he uses that then either for his stock or he sells that product as part of it. So we're just leasing the land to a local farmer at this point in time. It's not a research agricultural field at this point.
Understood. So does the farmer still is part of this process as you continue?
He will be. He'll be renting lands around the array. He'll still have that, both to the south, east, west, and even the north of the array. He'll still be renting those lands for production of whatever agricultural product he's interested in at that point.
Cool. Yeah, that was my main question, was just the stakeholder involvement with the farmers and the researchers who are already involved in this land.
Yep. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Morgan, for the question.
Hey, everybody. I have two questions. One that is coming from our Zoom friends, and then another that I just wanted to bring to y'all. So this one comes from Scott Williams from the Wisconsin Energy Institute, and the question came in sort of midway through the conversation. So in some senses, it's been answered a little bit, but maybe you could go into some greater depth. So Scott asks, does the proposed solar project take size into account and the spacing and sort of the possibility of needing to sort of vary the spacing? You've talked to that a little bit already, but I guess to what degree are you open to having a significantly smaller production in order to allow for other uses? So maybe we can talk about that, and then I'll have my second question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Scott, for the question. I'll start things off and then maybe hand it over to some of our panelists. And John, I'm thinking maybe this might be an area for your input especially. But so the objective here of what we're looking to accomplish under the tariff that Andy talked about, this customer-hosted tariff, we're seeking to get to that 2.25 megawatt size array. So that's the objective in terms of the number of panels. We are constrained on the site to roughly this 15-acre location within the campus, and that's due to a variety of factors. Bartlett mentioned the wetlands a little bit to the south, and some other uses of the campus. And so we have this 15-acre parcel, and we have this objective to put enough panels within that 15 acres to maximize that output to that 2.25. But from there, it really is a bit of an open question as far as the spacing of the panels, as far as the panel height. But when you start making a lot of distance between panels or taller panels, I know that there can be a lot of construction considerations and also ongoing operation considerations. So, John, I'm wondering if maybe you have some input in terms of some of the nuance there.
Sure, thanks. From a design standpoint, and we reference this kind of initial drawing, what does it look like? Design is typically set when we're talking about maximizing return, and it's really maximizing solar production. To achieve that, it's basically all down to shading concerns. So you want the array to not shade itself, and that's where you're setting the distance between modules. And so that's a factor of multiple things, notably the pitch of the solar module. So how tall is the back end of the module? That's going to set the line that's going to cast a shadow. Also the topography of the site, as Gary mentioned, this is on a southern facing slope, which helps. So naturally the rows to the north are going to be more elevated and out of the shadow of the modules to the south. But when we get into this design process, if we talk about different parts of the solar array having different characteristics, different racking, be it a fully vertical fence or something lower slope. It's all a game of trade-offs and setting then the spacing of the array from those. And again, the shadow is complicated by the fact of, we're not on the equator, so the angle of sun changes throughout the year, and we are always trying to maximize production in whatever bounds we work within. For where we are in our current latitude. So production in the summer is going to be more than the winter. We're ideally looking for an angle of irradiance of 90 degrees, so perpendicular to a solar module. But with a fixed array, that only happens, basically at two narrow points throughout the year. So it's a engineering challenge, but I hope that addresses some of the concerns.
That's great.
Maybe I'll build on that just a little. The question was asking about, the minimum spacing between rows. I think what John just described would be, to the earlier point, kind of that trying to get the most energy production out of the minimal acreage possible. And to do that, you want the rows as close together as we can to minimize shading. So as we increase row widths, we want to understand the why we are increasing the row widths. Is it for a specific reason, a specific research goal, a specific piece of machinery? Because we can absolutely space them out farther, a little bit longer wires, things like that, but we're also using more acreage. And so we don't want to necessarily use up a ton of extra acreage if there isn't a specific research or design criteria driving that. So I think that's something we're hoping to dial in a little more as we are getting into the design, is what would be a driver for those wider rows? Is it a specific research aspect or along those lines? So hopefully that helps address the online question.
Great. And quick question to a different topic. So it seems that there would be parallels between what we're imagining with grazing as a possibility under here with agroforestry, which is integrating grazing with trees. And the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems on campus, particularly Diane Mayerfeld, is doing some work around grazing in sort of dappled tree, sort of shaded areas and full sun areas. So she might be somebody good to talk to. And with grazing, I'm thinking about this this hillside that you want to have the water area for animals in sort of a central location, so you're not having to run hose all along. And if it's south sloping, you don't necessarily want to have animals running up and down the slope. So the orientation could pose some challenges with grazing if you want to have paddocks not running north south but running east west, because you're gonna have to space water out quite a ways down the road. But I think that it's something to explore with somebody who has that grazing background. But Diane might be a good person to talk to. So.
Great. Thank you, Ian, and thanks for again for that question, Scott. Another question here.
Hello, my name is Isaac. I have two questions. The first one is going to be, is there a set agricultural yield that you guys are wishing to achieve? Because the way it sounds like you're just trying to produce the most energy possible within a given area. So the whole point of agrivoltaics is that you're combining both, but the way it's being pitched, it sounds like it's 15 acres, we'll shove as much solar panels as possible within this area.
Yeah. Well, I'll start, and then
Why don't
maybe
you start?
Steve. So great question. Thank you, and I can tell by your T-shirt you're part of the agrivoltaics design team. So we're especially interested in your feedback there. And so I think as the project team, I'm not sure that the concept of agricultural production has come up, if I'm understanding that correctly. More, I think what we were thinking about was more around the areas of research potential or demonstration potential. But did you find in your design work or other that ag potential could be or should be something we should be thinking about?
Yeah, the big part is that you're going to have crop shading if you would put these all together. So what we would try to do is we'd try to achieve about 80% of crop production. That way we're still kind of going true to the whole agrivoltaics. Otherwise, again, it's just kind of like you're shoving solar panels on the field, which is what's been done 100 times over. So that's kind of what we found. Again, we can talk about that afterwards over there, but yeah. And then I guess my second question about this is more for Iant Energy. Do you guys see this entering the private sector? For example, like you'd go to, let's say, a farmer on a field, right? You would want to rent or lease their land, or is this something that you guys really only do within the public sector or the university setting?
Sure.
Yeah,
You want to take that one?
Yeah. It's available to the private sector and the public sector. What's limiting in terms of the private sector is the range of 200 kilowatts versus up to 2.25 megawatts. So that bandwidth is if somebody, let's say a farmer, doesn't have, at least I'm speaking in terms of the customer hosted program. They can still do behind the meter solar if they want to. That's a capital investment for them. But in terms of the customer hosted tariff-based program, so they have to have aggregated more than 200 kilowatts of power usage. And then we can start looking at that opportunity for anybody in the private sector, any customer, any company, any entity. In fact, what we do is we try to encourage, we have a certain percentage of public sector companies and percentage for our tariff that we need to achieve. So it's available to everybody. It's just the bandwidth is based on megawatt or power usage.
Now, I'll add to that slightly is that this is to Iant Energy. We're also considering this as a pilot project where we're hoping to learn. And that's where, working with UW and, others in this room, I think your example was spot on egg yield. That sounds like a potential research project to me of dedicate the site or a portion of the facility to a specific crop and a measurable, quantifiable yield impact, potentially multi-year, against something. And so that's kind of what we're looking for as the design team, is what should we be using this site for, where it can provide the best learnings that we can share and apply, not only at this site, but outside of this site. And so, you know, as you know, once we kind of put steel on the ground and set that height, it's hard to change from once it's in the ground. And so we're trying to define what are those research projects that the different groups hope to accomplish. And then we can take that as we design the layout and the racking height and things like that.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So there's been comments about, you know, this 15 acres and the number of panels and maximizing all of that. The 15 acres really allows for us to put these panels in here for 2.25 megawatts in a way that does spread them out to allow for agrivoltaics. If we were just doing solar panels, it would be much less than the 15-acre layout that we have. But we've decided that, okay, we want to do agrivoltaics. That was first and foremost. So we're going to have a wider spacing. We also need standoff space all the way around it for a fence. We need access and management and maintenance kind of spaces. So it's not about maximizing the solar panels. It's about getting 2.25, but then also bringing in the agrivoltaics piece of it. So it really is, from a land use perspective, probably a really great way to do this and get that research going, because we know that this is an issue across the state and across the country.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the question. And so Niels, we've got your question, and then I'm just taking a look at the clock here, and we're running short on time. So what I think we'll do, Niels, we'll take your question, and then we'll wrap up for the full session, but we'll invite people to do some of that informal networking. I recognize that there are several folks in line still with questions, so we do want to get your questions, but I think we'll need to do that informally offline after Niels' questions. So Niels, take it away.
Thank you, Josh, and everyone. I'm Niels Walter. I'm a solar energy consultant. I'm just curious about this 2.25 megawatt cap, because that's the firm peak demand. Typically, that's when the customer is also buying all the power, and you can't buy more power from distributed resources like this than you're using at any 15-minute interval. So I don't think UW is buying this power from what you guys have said. You've not mentioned that. So that's kind of question one. And number two is, if the UW system wants to add more solar in any meter, maybe behind the meter, maybe other projects like this, will this one project tap out all the solar they can do, or anything renewable, or even batteries, because they've already met all their firm demand with this solar project?
Great.
I can answer number two. Maybe Jeff can answer number one. Yes, so they will be limited based on the firm demand that we size this project with. They're at their, at least for this particular project, they're at their limit.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know whether or not you have any more firm demand beyond 2.25. But for this particular project, I think it's limited at 2.25. Whether or not more projects can happen based on additional firm demand on different facilities, I'm not quite sure. I'll have to look.
I'm even wondering about a net metering system on some building that's, connected to the Alliant grid, and you're like, oh no, you filled it up with this, you can't do anything else.
Yeah, I can add to that perhaps a little, is that the program specifically that we're looking at for this project is the customer-hosted renewable, which is an approved project category by the Public Service Commission.
Yeah.
And so I think that would maximize what we could do under that program. Now, we are still potentially open, and there's other types of programs we can look at with UW and with other customers if they max out the customer-hosted program, but that would basically maximize that particular tariff, if that makes sense.
I guess I'm saying that the UW should be very clear on, if you maximize this, does that close you out of other options? And also, just one comment, when I help with ground-sited projects, I know this is on a slope, I don't know how steep it is, but the typical row spacing is 20 to 25 feet, not 15. And of course, the south slope helps with that because, there's less shading. But a couple comments, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Niels. And just to respond to your question from the UW perspective, yes, our understanding under this customer hosted tariff, 2.25 is the max project for the tariff, but we don't expect that it will limit our further involvement with Alliant or with other utilities that we work with.
I think you might mean post to post, not edge to edge for spacing, perhaps.
Oh, on the spacing there, John?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, this has been terrific, Niels. Thank you so much for the question and for the comments. And please join me in giving our panelists a warm round of applause.
Hold on.
And I would like to thank everyone here for attending, and we expect that this will just be the start of the conversation and not the end. So I would invite any of you to contact me or contact Gary Brown. Our contact information is up there. If you have further questions related to the UW role, as well as our contacts at Alliant and Sunvest are located there as well. So again, thank you so much for attending in person and on Zoom. And this will conclude our discussion for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Wonderful.